In 1492, a German monk wrote a book arguing that the printing press was a disaster. Then he had it printed. And he wasn't a hypocrite. He owned 2,000 printed books. He was one of the most printed authors in Germany, and he spent the rest of his life insisting the press was a mistake. Here's the part nobody tells you. The thing he's most famous for being wrong about? He was right. It just took 400 years to prove it. His name was Johannes Trithemius, and the first thing you need to know about him is that he couldn't read. Not until he was 15. Born 1462 in a village called Trittenheim on the Moselle River. His father died young. His stepfather wanted nothing to do with schooling. One historical source describes the boy as growing up in complete ignorance. No reading, no writing, nothing. Then, somewhere in his mid-teens, something clicked. He taught himself to read, picked up Latin at frightening speed, ran away from home, and made it all the way to Würzburg, where he talked his way into studying under one of the leading humanist scholars in Germany. So, hold on to this. The man who would write the most famous defense of handwriting in history spent his entire childhood locked out of it. He didn't take literacy for granted. He knew exactly what it cost. And that's not even the strange part of how he ended up a monk. January 1482. He's 19, walking home on foot with a friend. They stop overnight at a small Benedictine monastery called Sponheim. They rest. They say their goodbyes. They head back out into the cold, and a snowstorm hits. It's bad enough that they can't go on, so they turn around and go back. The prior, a man named Henry of Holzhausen, had already noticed something in this kid during the first visit. He invites him to stay. 8 days later, Trithemius is a monk. About a year after that, he's elected abbot. He's the youngest person in the building. He hasn't even been ordained. His entire life turned on the weather. Now pay attention to this next part, because everything else in this story swings on it. When Trithemius took over, the library at Sponheim held a few dozen books. Over the next 23 years, he grew it to roughly 2,000 volumes, 800 of them manuscripts, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and more. A tiny, obscure monastery in the middle of nowhere became internationally famous, and scholars traveled across Europe just to see it. So how did he build it? He bought printed books. There was no other way. You cannot hand copy 2,000 books in one lifetime, let alone 23 years, at a rural monastery with no money. The only reason a place like Sponheim could own a world-class library in the 1490s is that the printing press had collapsed the price of a book. He knew that. He exploited it relentlessly. And it ran the other way too. Around 30 printed editions of his own writing came out during his lifetime. He was one of the most widely printed living authors in Germany. By any measure you want to use, this man was one of the single greatest beneficiaries of the printing press in Europe. Which brings us to 1492. That year, he sits down and writes a book called In Praise of Scribes. The argument? Monks must keep copying books by hand, and printing is a threat to civilization. 2 years later, it's printed in Mainz, the city where Gutenberg invented the thing. And this is the point where most people telling this story laugh and move on. Silly monk. Scared of progress. Don't. Because his arguments were better than yours. He made 4 arguments. Not one of them was stupid. 1. Durability. Words on parchment survive 1,000 years. Paper, he said, maybe 200. This wasn't superstition. He had manuscripts on his shelves that were already 700 years old. He could pick them up and hold them. That's not a hunch. That's evidence. 2. The archive. Printers only print what sells. Obscure texts, niche scholarship, anything without a paying audience. None of it gets printed. And if monks stop copying by hand, it's gone. Someone has to preserve the things nobody wants. He was right about that. 3. Quality. A handmade copy can carry illumination and craftsmanship no printed page could match. Also right. 4. Discipline. Copying is meaningful physical labor. Take it away and you don't free the monk. You just leave him idle. That last one is the interesting one because look at what he's actually doing. He stopped defending books. He's defending the value of work itself. So he writes this careful, passionate, genuinely well-argued book. And then the universe does something almost cruel. It comes out in a single edition, and it is never reprinted in his lifetime. A book arguing against printing, which needed printing to reach anybody, which the printing industry then quietly declined to carry. You could not design that on purpose. And there's one more layer. He wasn't leading this fight. He was late to it. Back in 1477, the illuminators of Toulouse had already formally protested to their city council that printers were taking their work. Copyist guilds across Europe had petitioned local authorities to restrict what printers could produce. By the time Trithemius picked up his pen, that battle was 15 years old and it was already lost. He wasn't writing a battle plan. He was writing a eulogy. I'm not sure he knew the difference. Quick thing before the last act because I want to know if you're ahead of me. He made one prediction that everybody agrees he got wrong. If you already know why he might actually have been right, drop it in the comments now, before I say it. I want to see who called it. What happened to him afterwards is almost absurd. Around 1499, he writes a 3-volume book that appears to be about summoning spirits to send messages across long distances. It isn't. It's cryptography. The magic was camouflage. The real content was hidden ciphers. From 1503, he's under suspicion of black magic. That accusation follows him the rest of his life. 1506, he resigns from Sponheim after 23 years. Not because of the sorcery charges, because his own monks turned on him. They resented his discipline and his fame. After he leaves, the monastery sinks straight back into obscurity. The Holy Roman Emperor offers him a court job, imperial historian, generous pension, wealthy abbeys. He turns it down. He takes a small abbey in Würzburg instead, where he arrives to find exactly 3 monks. He dies in 1516, aged 54, still bitter about the library he lost. 2 years later, a book of his is published called Polygraphiae. It's the first printed book on cryptography, and it introduces a cipher grid that underpins encryption for the next 300 years. His Steganographia finally gets published in 1606. 3 years after that, the church bans it. It stays banned until 1900. 291 years. The man who said printed books were temporary is remembered today entirely because of his printed books. And the one work he couldn't get printed sat suppressed for 3 centuries. So, the paper. Was he right? About the paper in front of him? No, not close. 15th century paper was made from rag pulp, and it is tough. Books printed in the 1450s through the 1490s, including his own, are largely still intact. That's over 530 years, and he said 200. He was wrong by nearly a factor of 3. But about paper in general, he was accidentally horribly right. In the 19th century, the paper industry switched to cheap acidic wood pulp, and that material destroys itself. Paper made from groundwood pulp can lose around 80% of its structural strength in 20 years. Some modern paper embrittles and disintegrates in as little as 5. Libraries have spent decades and enormous amounts of money fighting what conservators actually call the brittle books crisis. So, a monk in 1492 said the new cheap medium wouldn't last, and the old expensive one would. He was wrong about the technology he was looking at. He was right about what happens next, because when you optimize a medium for cost and speed and volume, you quietly stop optimizing it for survival. And nobody notices until the thing you were trying to keep is already gone. One last thing. The scribes didn't vanish when printing won. Their skills migrated. Over the following generations, that trade turned into new professions. Clerks, public servants, journalists, accountants, bookkeepers, typists, lawyers. Read that list one more time. Trithemius got the timeline wrong. He got the medium wrong, and he lost. I'm still not sure he was the fool in this story. If you like stories about people who got the future wrong in interesting ways, there's a whole shelf of them on this channel. Subscribe and I'll keep pulling them down.